Hi everyone. Happy Friday. It's what is it? The 22nd, April 22nd. For the record, I'm actually now tracking it. This is our 102nd consecutive Friday community gathering. 102nd, and I wonder why I'm tired. So thank you for being with us. We've been talking. In case you're new to True, and if you just stumbled onto us on YouTube, we do this every week since April 17th, 2020. It was a response to shutdown. Uh, we were all feeling lost. We were all feeling isolated, and I knew nothing about the virtual world. I knew nothing. I'm completely a non-tech person, but there we were having to do something because we couldn't meet live. Remember trying to wrap your brain around that? Remember when the first week we were going shutdown? I have to stay in. What is that? Is that legal? Um, and we're all trying to figure out what's going on. And remember when we thought it was going to be 2 weeks and then 4 weeks, and then our president told us it would be over by Memorial Day, and then Fourth of July, and then September, and on and on and on. Um, so we've gone through a lot. God bless us all for getting through it, but we have. Um, it it was it was inevitable that I find that I had to do something. I had to either close my company or I had to do something. So I had to find my way to Zoom, and I had to find my way to what we're doing now virtually. Um, Learned how to do that. Been doing this every week. People come every week, and I'm grateful and honored to be able to host them and for people to get together and talk about what they're up to and what they're doing, and feel and even feelings. We even talk about feelings sometimes. And the conversation that kind of has been wiggling back and forth when we think things are gonna open, we start talking about live performance, and then suddenly we're shut down again, and then back to live and shut down again. Right now, we think we really are in a changed situation. In the very least, the virus is not having the same effect that it was having 2 years ago. In the very least, even though I know people right now who have had COVID, I've known more people now than in 2 years. At least they're not getting as sick. That's not to say that there aren't long-term effects, and it's not to say that it doesn't completely stink. It does. Nobody should get it. But we're talking now about live performance. We're talking about reopening. Erik Bottcher was with us a couple months ago. Actually, it was it was like November. It was late October or November, and we were talking about initiatives that were being made in order for us to be able to open one of our primary businesses in the city, which is theater. Uh, it's really one of the lifebloods. The arts really is one of the lifebloods of New York City and of the state as well. And it also is the lifeblood in some ways of our culture. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have Erik in with us today, and I have Aimee Todoroff with us as well, is I want to talk about why we don't talk about the arts. Um, it's it's a frustrating thing for me, but I want to welcome Erik Bottcher and Aimee Todoroff to the room. Um, Thanks for being with us. We're not really going to talk about shutdown per se. We're really going to talk about what we can do to nurture the arts in our city, in our state, in our country. Um, Shutdown or no shutdown, COVID or no COVID, we still have artists who have voices that need to be heard. So, Aimee, why don't you introduce yourself first? We'll do ladies first, if you don't mind, Erik, and tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about League of Independent Theater. And then I'm going to introduce Erik, and he's going to tell us about himself.
Well, of course, I'm happy to go first if that's all right with the council member. I have a feeling
Please.
it will be. He is quite the gentleman. Uh, we got to know him during our endorsement process for the city level elections, which I was alluding to a little bit in the conversation before we started uh, about what the League of Independent Theater does. We are a 501c6 political advocacy organization. Most of the audience is probably very familiar with what it means to be a 501c3, and you
Three.
understand
Three.
and you understand what that means, and that there are certain limitations with that status in terms of lobbying for specific legislation or endorsing candidates. Because we have that six, in our status, we are specifically created so that we can endorse candidates, we can lobby for specific legislation, we can speak to people like the council member about what priorities are for the independent artists in New York. And what we find often is that the concerns of independent artists are also the concerns of institutions, are the concerns of everyday New Yorkers, that there's so much crossover between what artists need and what artists care about and what the rest of the city cares about. There's really a very...
I just want to jump in. I just want to say from
Yeah.
the 501c3 perspective, in case it isn't obvious to you all, we aren't allowed to advocate. We have to be very careful. I'm always sort of walking a very fine line. I have political feelings. I have political beliefs. I certainly have become more of a political person than I have been in my life due to things that are just happening in our country. It's just forced me to have to take a stand about things. Aimee, am I allowed to write an editorial in which I take a political stand as long as I don't endorse a politician?
I think if you do it as Bob Ost individual, I think you can. As if you do it as True, then I believe you cannot, but I'm not positive about that. I think you can write, as you alluded to, you can be very careful in writing an opinion, but I believe you have to steer clear of saying things like, I support Bill S3349. I think you can talk about concepts and what your opinion is about what arts need. But maybe the council member knows.
Do you know anything more
specifically.
Erik, do you know any more about this?
Do you?
Yeah, keep me from breaking any rules.
Yeah, no, not at all. A 501c3 can advocate for legislation and policy. It's electoral work that's off limits. Party, candidate, but you can certainly say, favor the passage of this thing and we need more money for this in the budget. You just can't, it's electioneering is the term.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And let's use that as a segue for you to just tell us a little bit about your background and who you are right now in the scope of our city.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Bob. Really appreciate it. And really happy to have you as a constituent. I met Bob when I was making phone calls as a candidate. Every day I would make hours and hours of phone calls. And I called Bob at home. That's how we...
and I gave him an earful about art and politics.
It was like the best because, by the way, most people hung up right away, right? That's what cold calling is. So, but really happy to be here, Bob. And I'm the council member for District 3, which is the Village, Chelsea, and Hell's Kitchen. Council District 3 has the highest concentration of theaters in the world. Very, very proud of that. The home of Broadway, off-Broadway, and off-Broadway. And I very much look forward to today's discussion and really appreciate that you have these discussions and that you're able to get so many people week after week. That just goes to show how meaningful these are, Bob.
And thank you for that. I appreciate it. I especially appreciate it while I'm in the middle of applying for grants. Oh God, it's like, shoot me now. So let's talk about my very basic premise, and it's similar to what I talked to you about the last time. Why is it that we hear about the arts so rarely in political conversation? And do you agree with? I mean, if you disagree with it, you can start by saying that. I can tell you that my personal experience is I never hear it talked about. I just never hear it.
It is a matter of perspective. I hear about it a lot and I talk about it a lot. Then again, we are the west side of Manhattan. I think there's a perception in many, among many, that when you're talking about people, they don't have enough food to eat. They're not being taught how to read and write. They don't have stable housing. They don't have social services. Why are we going to talk about, song and dance and acting and music? What I always try to communicate to folks is that the arts and culture are essential to helping with all those other issues. Education, you can't have sound education without arts and culture, without art and music. It doesn't work. There's empirical data around it, and there's case after case of people whose lives were changed by it. It's a way of lifting people out of poverty. It's an incredible employment vehicle for people with economic, who've been left behind economically. So I talk about it a lot, and I think that collectively we need to really continue pushing the fact that arts and culture is an essential public good, right along with the other public goods. I have to commend some of the efforts that have taken place in recent years under the de Blasio administration, where there was a real effort to diversify arts and culture, the city's support of arts and culture, to make it clear to communities everywhere that arts and culture is more than just Carnegie Hall and Lincoln Center and the Met. By the way, love them all, but it's a lot more than that. So I think historically, there's been a perception that arts and culture is for like this kind of person in this kind of place, but it really is part of all of our lives in every community.
Yeah, Erik, I think I do agree with you. And in the last few years as a political advocate, I have struggled with that perception that art is a luxury. And it is hard to speak to a borough president about creating art programs when on their desk they're seeing people who do not have food. So I understand that, but we have over the last few years had a lot of success in explaining and framing arts as arts are a mental health issue. Arts are an equity issue. Arts are a small business issue. And if we can maybe explain to somebody who thinks of it as a luxury, and it is not. I do not believe that it is a luxury. I think it is absolutely as essential as sanitation to the health and livelihood of our communities. That is a way to increase the amount of conversations that we can have around.
I think the reason it's perceived that way is because there's an undue focus on commercial Broadway as being theater, and the Metropolitan Opera as being opera, and all of the big guys really have the biggest presence in the conscience of the country, and a lot of that is unattainable for a lot of people. We're an arts organization, and you are too, that is dealing on several levels. I mean, I have people that are commercial Broadway producers, but the bulk of my membership are just young, I shouldn't say young, just artists who are just flying by the seat of the pants, making art on all different levels. We have an off Broadway as well as off Broadway as well as Broadway. I'm most attuned to theater. The other arts I love as well. In fact, I have a Philharmonic subscription this year. And that's the other thing. When we talk about the arts and wanting to give more breathing room for the arts, we're really talking about a couple things. One of them is we want our children to be educated and in culture, just for the reasons that you were talking about, Erik, before. It's a lifeline for them. It's a way of seeing the world in a way that they can feel more included in. But we're also talking about making art. You and I are talking, in particular, Aimee, we're talking about making art. So it's great that the Philharmonic has Beethoven and Shostakovich and Stravinsky. It's like, what are the possibilities? What are the opportunities for new artists, for the people today that are going to make art that represents who we are now? It's great that we have a map of who we've been for the past 20 centuries, but how about today? So what are we doing to help our artists? Aimee or Erik, can you
Yeah.
do you have any
Well,
answers for that?
I'm laughing because you were talking about the grant process that you're going through. And exactly, that anyone who has to do it, that's the feeling, that's the gesture. I sat through a workshop, and I hate to say that was the feeling. I sat through it on how to apply for discretionary funding, and it is so difficult. It is unnecessarily difficult. It's prohibitively difficult. So one of the things that I think has been extremely successful, and Erik can speak to this because I know that he was a supporter of this, was the City Arts Corps, which was a program that gave artists one-time direct payment to create their art, and all they had to do was have some sort of public engagement element in what they were creating. And I think the real win of that, and something that I think that the city needs to take going forward, is we fought for a very simplified application process. I think it ended up being 5 questions, something that any artist can do while you're also trying to put your show up. You're also trying to do the marketing for your shows. We all have a million hats. So I think that model, which I have not yet heard a negative response to it from any corner of any arena that I'm in, I think has been a really successful model for going forward and for what the city can do.
Do you know whether the application process is simplified for DCA, Department of Cultural Affairs? Because that's the one that's got me like the wind knocked out of me right now.
I do not know. I don't know.
Okay, so we're not here to talk about those specifics. We want to talk about really what we see as the possibilities of what we can do to improve our cultural footprint, to actually improve things so that we can have artists who are a little bit more comfortable and can actually make their voices be heard and tell the stories of who we are today.
Well, could I share something about what I think is the most urgent task at hand?
Yes.
Is getting audiences back and getting the arts economy open again by getting people back to the city and back in seats, because you could do all the great policies, but if there's no one to fill the seats and buy the tickets and to make it economically viable, we're not going to recover. So I've been putting a huge focus in my role on things like sanitation, getting the city back into shape, right? For the world, for people, for tourists, for office workers, for residents. People are in decision-making mode right now. Are we gonna visit New York or not? Are we gonna visit New York for a weekend of going to see shows, or should we not? Should we stay in New York, or should we move? Should we leave? Should we keep our business here, or should we not? And every overflowing wastebasket on the corner, every trash explosion, every indignity that people have to go through is another thing that's going to hurt the city and hurt the arts economy and hurt artists who have put everything they own into a show. And then
I thought I had read that there was an uptick in tourism, so I mean, it's going in a good direction.
It sure is, yeah. So tourism is coming back, and the numbers are looking good. What isn't coming back the way that we need is office workers. And office workers are a real big part of arts and culture, seeing shows, the corporate purchasing. So we need office workers to come back, and we're competing against these larger trends of remote work and other things. So I was just looking at some of the stats. Apparently, the Hudson Yards properties with all those office buildings, they're at 60% of their pre-pandemic capacity in terms of the number of people who swipe in. We need to get much, much higher. Will people ever go to work 5 days a week, 9 to 5? I don't think most people will, but we need to get back to that volume of people who came into the city, came into Manhattan and went to lunch, went out to see a show after work before heading home, met their partner out at a show. That's a real big problem, that we haven't had that economic activity, because it hurts the neighborhood, small businesses and restaurants, theaters. So we really need to make the city as best it can be to get people to come back. There is one interesting phenomenon, and that is the number of people who live in the outer boroughs that aren't coming into Manhattan to work. You know, they're not coming into their office in Manhattan. They're working from home in the outer boroughs. So we're seeing an interesting, this was Dan Garodnick, the director of city planning, was telling me this, that they're seeing interesting patterns in the economies in the outer boroughs with increased economic activity in some of those areas. With, picture it, all those office people who used to go to Manhattan every day, they're now working from home. They're going out to lunch in the neighborhood. So it's complicated.
So let me ask you this: what do you think might be some possible solutions to this? Let me also first to say I'm feeling mildly optimistic. I do see crowds. I mean, I'm fighting crowds on the street now, and I'm still wearing my mask. One of the things that's confusing right now is that we have people we have a judge saying that the mask mandates have to be revoked. We can't do that anymore, and there are people that are perfectly happy about that, but then there are just as many people who are uncomfortable because even though they don't think they're going to die from COVID, they don't want to get it. Where are we now, and what can we do? Does New York have a consistent policy that I'm missing? I know New York has its own policy, but given the fact that it's not supported by the federal ruling, what can we do? What do we do? And is that going to harm us in terms of bringing back tourism? That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, the on again, off again, confusing guidance has not helped. And this alert system they put into place was designed to reduce some of that confusion, where, you know, if we hit these metrics, here's the alert level that's going to go. The problem is, over time, you know, even metrics change and the significance of metrics change. So we're all sort of figuring this out together. Government's got to avoid being contradictory and confusing to give people a sense of confidence. It doesn't help when we have these additional rise in cases. Who knew that as we were getting into this warmer weather, that we'd see these cases go up? The good news is that hospitalizations aren't up significantly. There's always a lag, but so far they're really not. Really, really good news. Very important that we get past this time of fear and confusion.
But I do have to say that my friends of mine who are getting COVID, in a couple cases, it's been long term. I mean, it hasn't been debilitating them. They didn't have to go into the hospital. They were sick for a week. They were sick for 2 weeks. But there seems to be still a tendency towards long-term COVID symptoms. So it's something that we really all would like to avoid. if possible. And it's becoming harder to know what to do. I mean, I, I'm proud of myself. I'm going out like once or twice a week now. That's me coming out of shutdown. Aimee, what's your experience been of it? Are you going to more activities, or I mean, if we're not going to theater, then
I have been going to theater. I've been wearing my mask the whole time,
yeah,
and I do empathize with the confusing back and forth of what the rule is. But I don't really see that being as big a problem for theaters because I think most people are familiar with the idea that when you're going into a space, that space will have its own rules, and most theaters are still requiring masks. I think there's an industry standard right now of masking in theaters. That may change and it might become more confusing, but at least for the time being, I have not felt any uh, problems or confusion. I've directed shows during this time, so I've been in the theater every day. And then I will, there'll be time periods where I've been to the theater a few times a week. I am heartened to see audiences coming back. I think people are eager to have those shared experiences, why we love theater. And I did want to uplift one of the comments that I saw scroll by. I agree with Erik completely that getting people to come back into Midtown is important, but this is also an opportunity to invest in New Yorkers. So we don't need to only focus on tourists. Tourism is a big part of our economy, but small, local, homegrown arts are also a big part of our economy. $1.3 billion in economic output before the pandemic was created by just the smallest small theaters. So I think this is an exciting time where I am hoping that we can find opportunities for theater in those outer boroughs, theater in other districts. And I understand Erik is focused on his district, which already has, as he said, all the theaters in there. But also
you would have won in Monopoly at this point.
Yeah.
You have the deeds to all of the houses.
Yeah, but his point about that sanitation is important, having clean streets where people feel safe. Tourists need to feel safe in our streets, but also the theater workers who are leaving the theater after the audiences have left need to feel safe. Traveling and doing
I was perhaps naively proud of New York's theater response and the COVID protocols that are in place. And I said this to a producer who was ready to kill me. Apparently, we have safety measures in theaters, in large part due to the adamance of equity, of actors' equity. It has increased costs for producers. It has made it more difficult to produce shows. And one of the other results of this is that producers have to be prepared with more understudies and standbys than they normally would have had to use in the past, because every day somebody in the cast winds up being testing positive, and they have to bring somebody else in. So on one hand, from the audience's point of view, I think we have something to be proud of. I think we've created an environment where I think the audience can genuinely feel safe, genuinely come to the theater and feel that they can have the theater experience without having to worry about coming down with something. Although back in the pre-mask days, you went into the theater, you came home with a flu. This is like 2 days later anyway. This is just what life is about. You go out, you see people, you socialize, and you come into contact with things, and you sometimes get sick. COVID was so serious that it frightened us all. And part of me wants to say, well, okay, maybe I'll go out to the theater, maybe I will have contact with somebody and I might get COVID, but it's not going to kill me. Suddenly it's not going to kill me. It's become like good enough, and it really shouldn't be good enough, and I know that in my heart. But I'm so eager to get us back to something resembling what we used to have, the life we used to lead. I don't know.
I want
I
better.
think what?
I want better. I want better than the life we used to lead. But that is an easy thing to say. There's a lot of work that
Def-
goes into changing the systems.
define that though. What would
Well,
that
one of the
be?
things we've talked about is that um, COVID has forced production timelines to slow down, which I think is a good thing. We have to factor in time that we didn't before. When we were creating art, it was always go, 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 go. And part of that is all of the producers on this call know how expensive it is. Space is expensive. Space is expensive.
You can say it a third time too.
Yeah, space is expensive.
There you go. Now we're getting close.
And so there is that sense of every time you're paying for space, and you're usually paying for it by the hour, you've got to be using every second of that space because the economics are so on a knife edge for every production. But with COVID, we have to slow down. We have to build in time for testing, and this actor is out because there was an exposure. So how do we bring a new actor in, or how do we rearrange our rehearsal schedule to accommodate for that? I think that is a good thing, but I do think that we need to adjust the way we work. There's a culture shift around how we're going to have to work that I think is better. Another thing that I think my dream for a better way of working is to have city subsidized rehearsal spaces that, the city is full of empty space. What can the city do to get artists using all of this empty space? That, can we take a floor of Hudson Yards?
There's a direct question to you, Erik. What would we need to do in order to make that a possibility? Because I agree, there's a lot of unused space that could easily benefit theater. I mean, as rehearsal space, possibly even performance spaces.
There is a glut of underutilized class B and C office space. The office market is very complicated right now because there is a huge demand for high-end, modern, new office space of the kind that apparently people in their 20s, this new generation of office workers, they have a certain expectation. They want everyone wants something that looks like a Google office building with the cafeteria and the high ceilings and the communal areas and the furniture, like the hangout areas.
Yeah, we're all spoiled by Zoe's extraordinary playlist.
That's the office space of the future. So there's a glut apparently of those newer buildings, and the East Midtown office stock, many other parts of town, the older office stock with the lower ceilings and the more the bland office building, they are having trouble filling that. How does the city address that? And apparently, not apparently, those efforts are underway. City planning is looking at different zoning mechanisms. I think that like theater space and performance space should absolutely be part of that. Yes, residential, there's a great need for residential. What other kind of uses like theater and residential and rehearsal space could be incorporated into that as well?
One thing that I want to say out loud while I have the council member is, I think we've talked about this a little bit, is there is a lot of development that happens, and what happens when the developers promise that, we'll put community space into their development as part of a community benefit agreement. There's no accountability if they actually don't follow through with that promise. So a lot of times approval for these big developments is based upon the assumption that the developers are going to add the value to the community by creating these spaces. And then they will either say, oh, well, we made a donation, so they have a tax write-off that covers their commitment, or they'll put in like a for-profit pharmacy and call that a community space. So I think that is one thing that I think the city could be doing, is holding developers to account when they promise a community space or a cultural space. They're getting approval for their development because they're promising that they're going to add value to the community. They're offering something in exchange for approval from community boards, and then they are going back on that. So that is my soapbox. I'm a little, it's on top of mine because there is a space, the center at West Park, that is in danger of being demolished right now, and the developers have no plan for community space, no plan for affordable housing. And so we are writing to, I know that is not Councilmember Bottcher's district, that's Councilmember Brewer's district, but I'm writing a letter to see what we can do about that.
Which actually brings up another major point of this whole discussion is we as artists want to see things changed, but we don't always get involved and engaged. What can we do as artists? Should we be writing letters to council people? I mean, do you read our letters? Do you actually read them, or do you have a staff who reads them?
Council members read letters. I think one of the most impactful things you could do that very few people do is ask for a meeting with their council member. We get thousands of emails, letters, but rarely does someone say, I'm a constituent and I live on so-and-so street and I want to meet with council member so-and-so. They'll say yes a lot of times. So I'd like to come in for a meeting to talk about this issue.
I think we tend to assume that the answer will be no, but it's good to hear you say that, and I want this to be emphasized for everybody in the room. You have to ask. It's the same thing about people who say, "How do I raise money for a show?" You ask.
Right, and by the way, even if it's like the chief of staff or the district director, they often make decisions, right? They actually, most of the time, they make decisions. So go for that as well.
I have to say there was a flood of comments in the chat, and I can't keep on top of them. So I would like people that have made comments in the chat that we haven't addressed to virtually raise your virtual hand. You know, if you go to the reactions window, which is down next, it's between breakout rooms and more. If you're on a desktop, I don't know where it is if you're on a laptop or anything else, but just raise your virtual hand and come and ask the questions that you've commented on in the chat, so we can directly respond to them. Otherwise, I'll have to have maybe Jay go through the entire chat and find everything. Okay, Marty Golden.
I'm working. I'm a board member at Gallery Players in Brooklyn, and we're in the outer boroughs. So you talk about having, you know, the community where there's a lot of vitality. People still are not showing up at our theater. We don't have a messy theater, you know. We're trying to run a show, shows like we always did. We're running a regular season.
Do you have COVID protocols?
Yeah, we wear a mask, be vaccinated.
Okay.
And so we have that down. It's on our website. It's all over the place, so people know that. But you know, we always had a very skewed older, you know, crowd, and they're just not coming. And you know, I don't know if they're ever going to come back.
Vernon?
So that's an issue. I mean, like where we are in South Slope, I have some ideas, but it's hard to organize all this stuff. There are actually a whole lot of small venues in our community that probably should group together and create some kind of marketing plan. But then, it's a whole thing. How do you fund this? How do you find the time for it? How do you get people to come to that stuff? You know, it's hard.
Yeah, but that's something that you could take an initiative and do. It's nothing necessarily. Well, you could talk to a politician in your district about support for an initiative. If we did this, would you help us in this way, or come up with some sort of.
it's just hard to balance everything that's going on. Again, because we're trying to run a program in a theater, and we're all a volunteer organization. There's no one paid. So we don't have a big staff to do anything. It's just us doing this thing. And I'm just saying it's so like the idea of cleaning up to make it ready for it. We're already clean. We have people that live in the community. They're right there.
Well, Marty, I went to the Irish Rep last week to see The Touch of the Poet, and they were almost full, and they were almost sold out for their entire run. So
maybe it's us.
No, have a conversation with Charlotte. It's Charlotte Moore, and say how do you do this? You know, give me some help. I'm a small theater company like yours, and can you give me some advice? I would ask somebody at Irish Rep, since they had success.
Okay.
I can't pretend that it's not harder to get audiences in. It is, but we are getting them. We are getting them. There are shows that are doing very, very well on Broadway, and Broadway, of course, is the most visible part of our business. I don't know what's happening with the theaters. It's good for me to know that you're struggling. It's not good for you to know it, but it's good for me to know that small theaters are having a struggle. But I don't know whether we can assume it's across the board. Erik, are you aware of small theater companies that are having a tough time or having a?
Yeah, absolutely. It's spotty. And by the way, having a couple busy nights in a row is great and all, but a theater, I'm not in the industry, but they really need to like fill a house for like nights a week for like weeks and weeks. So you could have like a strong opening, but you need to sustain that for months to be economically viable. That's the hard part. Again,
well, that was a pre-COVID challenge as well.
Yeah, that's the feedback I get. Bob, I wish I could stay all night. I'm having the best time. Please have me back again. Oh, do you know who else I'd like to bring back? Is Chi Osei, the chair of the Cultural Affairs Committee. He's a good friend of mine, and I know he'd love it, and he'd be a great, great guest for this meeting.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that. I'd be happy to have you back. Maybe we'll get Julie again to the next time as well.
Yeah.
Julie was interesting because she was head of the Arts Council, and I thought she would have some interesting perspectives from her experience there.
Although, well, I can't thank you enough for having me, and it's really great to see you, Aimee, and so many familiar faces. I see Dr. Sue on here and other great folks. Really, really appreciate this opportunity.
Well, thank you for being with us. I will basically throw all the questions to Aimee now.
No problem. But
thank you,
Erik,
everyone.
it's good to see you, and it's good to see all the good work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you very much. That means a lot to me.
Yeah, I'm also very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
I also do want to encourage Marty. The Gallery Players is an excellent theater and has done great work for a long time. And he is not the only person having a hard time getting audiences back. One thing that it did occur to me that a few years ago, the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment did an economic impact study, which then led to a push to get people into small theaters. So perhaps if there are a lot of theaters in your area, you could talk to a council member, see if maybe they want to put together some kind of program that might be helpful.
Thank you for your thoughts. Appreciate it.
Okay, Judy Binus, you have your hand raised. I hope that we can answer your question.
Well, I don't know that you can, but the fact of the matter is I'm in the very high risk cohort of getting COVID and having serious complications from the Omicron. Whether you're masked, boosted, all that, there's still a huge amount. And the idea of going to a theater, just a space, I have canceled my subscription to the Philharmonic for this season because I
got your tickets.
I know. I was crying after it's been 20 years I've been there. But anyway, to go into a space with people I don't know, where the, or whether they really are vaccinated or not, where they've been. You know, you can have had COVID, been boosted, and you can still spread it. So for us, it's a very dangerous thing to go into a theater. And there's so many shows I want to see, and it's killing me, but I can't, I want to live, and I am living, doing other things,
I think it's a smart priority. Call me crazy.
but yeah. So what do you do when a theater has to maintain a certain capacity to exist, and yet 6 feet apart, and it isn't even the 6 feet. You take your mask down to drink. Bars, the theaters are selling drinks, and the virus isn't going to just hover in your mouth while you drink. So what do you do? I guess this is the same problem with everybody that's.
Well, so if it's a question, the answer is stay safe and take care of yourself.
Yeah. And
that's the answer to everybody. But there are going to be people that are in your position, and they're not going to come back to theater. And then there's people that are raging to come back and not worried or choosing not to worry. And then there's people that are kind of balancing it. I mean, I'm one of those. I'm in the middle. I'm one of the middle people.
yeah.
I have to really.
What I do want to say is it would be terrific if theaters could have streaming of the shows as well.
That's going to be a panel discussion that we're going to have. I think it's going to be May 27th. I have guests coming to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of streaming current performances.
Yeah.
So I do have that on my list. I want to try to get in a lot of the questions that were asked, even though I don't know whether Aimee and I will have the same kinds of answers that Erik might have been privy to. Ken Burry says, I would like feedback from our guests to read the following. Insurance is and has always been the engine that enables and drives capitalism. It's a broad statement. I am concerned that with the drawdown of insurance industry support for the theater industry in New York and elsewhere, our life and industry is in great jeopardy. In bringing in around $13 billion a year to the New York City economy alone and employing over 100,000 people pre-COVID, its overall effect is far greater. So it appears to me the writing is on the wall. For theater to survive, a government is going to have to fund the industry. Okay, so I wasn't sure where you were going with that. So basically, you're starting off by talking about the insurance industry and the impact that it may be having on our industry, and you're ending up by saying that we need some sort of government support for the theater industry to come back. And the truth of the matter, there has been government support. It's not like nothing has been done. A lot of the Broadway shows got specific money from the government to cover the loss of income that they had. They also had insurance companies that were doing that as well. But there were actually government programs that were doing that. Do you know anything else about this, Aimee? We could really use Erik right now, couldn't we?
Well, the question, it's a complicated question. And I initially, when insurance was mentioned, I immediately went to health insurance and was taking a moment to be like, well, health insurance. And the New York Health Act is a law that is before the state right now and has an incredible amount of support. It has all the signatures it needs. It just needs to come before a vote. And that would cover health insurance for any New York resident, which does have an impact on the arts because so many artists have such a complicated relationship with their health insurance. But I don't think that's exactly what you were asking.
If anything at all. Yeah.
Right.
Ken, do you want to clarify your question? And actually, can you make it a more concise question for us? Yes. Are you there? Are you there?
There have been programs in the past, and one of the things we are always pushing for is a new WPA, a new version of that. It makes perfect sense. We have a proven track record of using programs like the WPA to create economic prosperity. We know that it works. We know that it leads to a golden age of American arts and culture. And there is a state bill that was put forth last session, but it did not pass. So that's something to continue to fight for. And the City Arts Corps, I'm very hopeful about the City Arts Corps because I do feel like that was the tiny little crack. And if we can just keep, dripping the water on the City Arts Corps, we can open it up to expand more programs where the city is helping to subsidize theater in a way that is healthy for everyone.
Dale Reynolds says, perhaps to increase theater attendance everywhere, local government and commerce might devise a plan for cheaper tickets for theater newcomers. Maybe that would start something good. There have been like in the 80s and 90s, there were subsidized programs for ticket buyers, but it was a privately funded subsidy. What do you think is the likelihood that we could convince the government to offer subsidies for ticket buyers? A lot of times, Dale, a lot of people apply for grants, especially not-for-profit theater companies. And there are some grants that do subsidize ticket prices so that they don't have to charge as much for their audiences. And that's something is really the domain of not-for-profit theater more than commercial Broadway theater. I'm not sure whether the government getting involved in a commercial industry works or not. Aimee, do you know why I'm struggling with that?
It is, yeah, I know why you're struggling with it. It's a hard thing to answer. There's no other way to say it. It's just hard to answer because I do think there's possibilities for programs, but they wouldn't come as a sort of, global umbrella program of the city is just subsidizing tickets. It would have to be something more carved out based on a particular department, like the Department of Education could create a program where they subsidize tickets, and I think they do in some cases, but it only goes to high school students, or it would have to be something like that, where I think it would be a much more difficult sell to get the city to subsidize sort of just a global program. But it is a good idea. And I do think Bob is right that it is something that most likely nonprofits or foundations or public-private partnerships would have to fund as opposed to the city.
Yeah,
That's my guess, though.
It's a little trickier with commercial Broadway. There was a program. I don't remember what it was, but I remember there were like 3 or 4 different Broadway shows that were subsidized and offered very inexpensive tickets. The program, I mean, it came and went. It didn't really catch on. Do you remember what I'm talking about? I think it was in the 80s or 90s. I remember that Stephen Lang was in one of the plays that participated in this. That's the only random things that I remember. I don't know why. So let's see. Lee Roscoe. There's a ton of New Yorkers who would like good theater, where the tourists just want the blockbusters. Why not concentrate on New Yorkers? There's been some conversation in the chat already about tourism versus New Yorkers, and from my understanding, New Yorkers can support the first month or 2 of a run of a show, and after that, it really depends on tourism, or it has traditionally. It's just a limited population. We are a limited population. We're a big population, but it's still limited. And at some point, you need an influx of support from tourists, from people that are not New Yorkers. Do you have anything more that you could add to that?
I think supporting smaller neighborhood-based theaters is a smart way to go because, I love a good Broadway show, but I hardly ever go to them because I work full time and I can't afford the tickets. Even with my TDF membership. So I think that
Oh,
there
good. I
is-
only have to spend $85.
Exactly. And then if I want my husband to come with me, it becomes a very expensive night out. But there are theaters that, you know, $20 tickets, $30 tickets, that you can see very good quality productions. And they most often are very specific to the community they're serving. Anything you'd see at, say, the Wild Project or something, in these smaller spaces, I think that is sort of where my heart is. So that's why I do a lot of advocacy. Broadway is wonderful. Broadway has paid lobbyists. So I think if we can get the city to support a lot of these smaller theaters, and I think one of the things we've also learned is that smaller theaters are not competition for Broadway or larger theaters. And in fact, the more you can get someone to go into a smaller theater and maybe invest $20 in a night out, the more likely they are to then want to go see a more expensive show.
The aspiration for what we like to call indie theater, what's sometimes called off Broadway theater, has always been to attract more of the tourist crowd. They've traditionally tourists do not find their way to showcases traditionally. They come to New York, and the thing that is most visible is commercial Broadway. The thing that is adventurous and scary for them is maybe going to an off-Broadway show. When you get down to the showcases and off Broadway, they don't know it's there really. And that's another conversation that we've had it period every 5 years we have a conversation about rebranding independent theater to try to attract a larger audience. Maybe we'll do that again. Maybe we'll do that again like in June. Let's see what else is here. Let's see. And Jay, if you've actually seen any questions or comments that you think we should address, please let me know. Dale gives us a London perspective. I've had a few plays on in London, 2 of them being before the days of big capitalism. They were performed in small theaters. We got rent-free from the pubs, big bars, that enjoyed our thirsty customers. It was a good deal for everyone. We have there's a vein of theater that we have in New York that sort of works out of bars and gets people to enjoy theatrical works that also are accompanied by drinks and joviality. We do it. As a producer, these are choices that the producer needs to make when he decides that he's going to produce something. What is the best venue for this particular work? Is it Broadway? Is it off-Broadway? Is it independent theater? And if it's an independent theater, what sort of venue will be most welcoming for the sort of piece that I want to produce? And in some cases, it's just natural that bars will work for certain pieces.
One thing that we need to factor into the conversation, though, is the development of the work. You may get a free space to perform it, but are you going to be able to rehearse it in that bar? Very often not. And so there's still that expense of the space. And I'm a big fan of theater and bars. I'm a big fan of non-traditional spaces. I think this is also part of where the city can help support smaller independent theater companies, because it takes time to get to a place where you can then go into a bar. I was shocked when I first moved to New York how difficult it is to find low cost rehearsal space. And it's not because the rehearsal spaces aren't trying, it's just that it is so expensive.
Let me just say this. Anybody want to comment on something that they put in the chat, because there's an awful lot here. We'll be here for like a half an hour if I go through all of these. But I want everybody to raise hands and let us know what you want to say. Lee, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just think that the sliding scale tickets for people who are low income, rather than just subsidies, might really work. And also funding for a federal theater project. Somebody started to mention that before. I'm right with you, Aimee. It worked It worked with the WPA in Roosevelt. It could work again, especially with state by state funding, because there are a lot of us doing work. We're not on New York, and we also need support. And if we can garner small audiences who can support us, we don't need the whole world to come. So thank you.
And just to state the obvious, there's really two different conversations. The conversation about the return of commercial Broadway theater is one, and it really is something that's very important and has a lot of impact on the economy of our city, and we don't downplay it. But we are also very interested in the development and the comeback of small independent theater showcases, things that are not as visible. And I think the answers are different answers depending on whether we're talking big and commercial or small and not-for-profit. Not-for-profit has its own ways of doing things that can be effective. Marty, is Gallery Players a not-for-profit, or is it commercial?
We're non-for-profit.
Okay, so there are also all sorts of grants and subsidies and things like that you have to look for, that they're out there.
Yeah, but the theater
Said the person is ready to shoot himself because he has to fill out the DCA application.
I mean, the theater traditionally has not gone after those things. It's one of the few theaters that actually operates on tickets sales.
Well, maybe it's time.
You know, I know that's what I've been saying with our group. It's just,
And you have a track record. You have an impeccable track record.
so we just have to get our act together to do that.
And I think a specific narrative to a funder about the fact that you've always depended on your ticket buyers, and you never had to reach out for funding before, but now due to COVID, your audience, it's very hard for you to get to your audiences, and you need help. And I mean, we're in a different environment now.
I have an interesting comment about underserved communities. We happen to have two brand new family shelters across the street from us. You know, it's not a problem for the theater, but we try to invite them to come for free to the shows. Very difficult, because it was very interesting, because to get through the program directors, to advertise it, and there were several hundred people that are there right across the street, and we couldn't get one to come. And it was interesting because it's hard. And plus, you know, there a lot of them are single mothers, and what do they do with the children when they come to the show? You know, it's kind of an interesting, just a little side point. I just thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, there have been situations where I wasn't able to give away free tickets also. I mean free tickets. So yeah, I understand. It sometimes feels discouraging. I think it's a lot of life is about being in the right place at the right time, and basically finding finding your way to the right people. It doesn't always. In other words, don't get discouraged when it doesn't work. Just maybe try a different tactic and try a different line of invitation somewhere else. I never understood, when I was the marketing director for the Midtown International Theater Festival, we used to struggle to give away. We would give away tickets to homeless shelters and things, and that often became hard. Why would that be hard? I want to give you free tickets.
I do think that, particularly if this is a new relationship that you're starting with the shelters, it does take time to establish a relationship, and that if you've offered them free tickets to one show, it's not surprising that you didn't get much of a response. But if you keep trying over time, there's also it is, even though I believe that theater might be the most healthy thing in the world for somebody going through a crisis, it's hard to convince someone in crisis that what they need is theater. And so maybe creating some programming, you have this wonderful opportunity to create some programming for people that are in crisis.
I got to tell you, when I had breast cancer, people were inviting me to breast cancer related shows and things, and it's like, no, I'm not doing it. It was, again, it's timing is everything too. Getting people at a right time, a time when they're open to things. So Jane Dubin says no shows with free tickets are very high. I think what you're saying, Jane, is that you don't suggest giving tickets away for free, but giving a minimum price so that people will show up. Is that what you're saying, Jane?
Yep.
Okay. I wasn't sure from the wording.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Like,
Yeah, basically saying that the ticket programs where you offer, $10 to a Broadway show that are subsidized, or $5 or $10 to an off-Broadway show, are much more. They may not be as they may not go as deep into the world, but when you offer free tickets, people value them as as free. They don't value them the same way that as if they have paid for them. There's no investment there. And if something else comes up, it's like, oh, whatever, I didn't pay anything for it. Whereas if they have some financial stake where $5 or $10 could be a huge amount of money, and they've paid $5, then they're going to make the extra effort to go see it. And it's a big problem. I mean, my theater company has a commitment to subsidize a third of their tickets. And we've found when we offer 20 tickets to a group for free, that maybe 7 will show up. Whereas if there's a subsidized ticket rate, then you get a better response.
I agree. It's been my experience as well. It's true. So we're gonna wrap it up now. I'm going to thank Aimee and in absentia Erik for being with us today. If there's anything that you really wanted to ask, I always open the door for everybody to come in and just let us know what you want to know. But YouTube viewers, you'll have to just end when we end because you're in YouTube. You're not with us live here right now. If you'd like to be, shoot me an email at trunltd@aol.com. That's trunltd@aol.com, and ask us to send you the Zoom link so that you can join us Fridays at 5:00. We'd love to have you. And also everybody here in the room and everybody out there in YouTube land, we do this for free, but it would be nice, to get some money so we can pay our staff and our expenses. So if you feel inclined to donate, go to TrueDonate, trudonate.com, trudonate.com. And maybe I'll see you next Friday. Next Friday, we're going to have some of the writers from our True Speak benefit from March 20th, and they're going to talk about rethinking their plays that were written for stage so that we could present them as effective virtual productions that were filmed and edited. Very different mediums. What did they learn? What did they like? What did they not like about the experience? We'll have a conversation. So you'll join us for the conversation next Friday. And that's it. Thank you very much, everyone.